Alexander Solzhenitsyn was born in Russia in 1918. He fought in the Russian army during World War II, and at the end of the war in 1945 he was arrested by SMERSH. I kid you not. That was the real name of the Russian secret services at that time. And he got arrested over the contents of a personal letter that he wrote to a friend, in which he criticised Stalin and the way that the war, the great, what's called in Russia the Great Patriotic War, was being conducted or had been conducted. So in retrospect, that wasn't a great move as far as SMERSH was concerned, because they made what was to be a very, very powerful enemy in Solzhenitsyn, who became a prolific writer and critic of technocracy, the type of technocracy that was being run in Russia at that time. So Solzhenitsyn was in and out of jail for saying and writing hurty words. And in 1960, he published a book called One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. And the book is actually really, really short, and it's definitely well worth a read. I would say to Hayes Reviews, why not get a copy of that, Nick, and read it? It won't take you very long. Now, something that's really quite interesting, I think it was Khrushchev who was in charge in Russia at that time in 1960. He actually allowed this book, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, to be published in Russia. And that was a bit strange, right? Because the book was all about a fictitious person. It was a novel, but it kind of was about working in a gulag. So at this time he's working on another book, a book that's later published called The Gulag Archipelago. And again, that's a much longer book. And it basically details his own experiences about the gulags that existed in the USSR. In 1974, he was arrested again and then deported. So he ended up in Germany, I think, in the first instance. What I'm going to read now is some extracts from a speech that Solzhenitsyn gave in Britain in 1976. And I think that this speech contains some pearls of wisdom that are exceptionally relevant to where we find ourselves in 2024. And I think maybe towards the end of the video, I don't know, I might see if we can tie together a few conclusions. Human nature is full of riddles and contradictions. One of these riddles is, how is it that people who have been crushed by the sheer weight of slavery and cast to the bottom of the pit can, nevertheless, find the strength to rise up and free themselves, first in spirit and then in body, whilst those who soar unhampered over the peaks of freedom suddenly lose the taste for freedom, lose the will to defend it, and hopelessly confused and lost, almost begin to crave slavery. Now, I think we saw some of that during the People's Pantomime. You know, we were supposed to be living in a free society, and there was a significant proportion of people who actually liked to be told to follow these kind of absolutely insane rules. So Solzhenitsyn's right there. Solzhenitsyn continues. He says, there is a German proverb which runs, Mut verloren, alles verloren, which translates as being, when courage is lost, all is lost. There is another Latin phrase, according to which loss of reason is the true harbinger of destruction. But what happens to a society in which both these losses, the loss of courage and the loss of reason intersect. This is the picture which I found the West presents today. Now, the thing we've got to remember here is that this is 1976. But, we can see the loss of courage and the loss of reason in people. It's not just people like Zacchaeus Stalin who can't define a woman. But we actually now, I've said this repeatedly on my channel, we've had situations where people are tested and they're asked to repeat 2 + 2 = 5, to repeat things that are just self-evidently nonsensical. And this is a failure of courage, isn't it? A failure of courage, and then also a failure of reason, a failure of a rejection of truth in favour of social approval. Solzhenitsyn continues. Not very far from where you live, in the Ukraine and in the Kuban, some 6 million peasants, including children, old men and women, died of famine, swollen with hunger and writhing in agony, and this was in peacetime. Not a single Western newspaper printed photographs or reports of the famine. Indeed, your great wit, George Bernard Shaw, even denied its existence. Famine in Russia, he said. I've never dined so well or so sumptuously as when I crossed the Soviet border. For whole decades, your rulers, your members of parliament, your spokesmen, your journalists, your writers, your leading thinkers managed to ignore the 15 million strong Gulag archipelago. Up to 30 books on the Gulag were published in Europe before mine, and hardly one of them was even noticed. So again, what I would say here is that he's beginning to attack this other form of technocracy that's, I think, has been given social acceptance, and that is what they call socialism. That it's okay, that type of technocracy is okay. And certainly when I was at school, it would drive me mad that we would have Holocaust Remembrance Day. But it was all about the crimes committed by the German National Socialist technocrats. And nothing would ever be said about the crimes committed by Marxist technocrats. And this is extremely dangerous because these ideas could easily be repackaged and reimposed on people who are without reason and ignorant and cowardly. He continues, the decline of contemporary thought has been hastened by the misty phantom of socialism. Socialism has created the illusion of quenching people's thirst for justice. Yeah, people think that socialism is justice, social justice, all of that. He continues, socialism has lured their conscience into thinking that the steamroller which is about to flatten them is a blessing in disguise, a salvation. This is the steamroller of the state, of course. And socialism, more than anything else, has caused public hypocrisy to thrive. It has enabled Europe to ignore the annihilation of 66 million people on its very borders. There is not even a single precise definition of socialism that is generally recognised. All we have is a sort of hazy, shimmering concept of something good, something noble, so that two socialists talking to each other about socialism might just as well be talking about completely different things. And of course, any new-style African dictator can call himself a socialist without fear of contradiction. But socialism defies logic. You see, it is an emotional impulse, a kind of worldly religion. Yeah, this is where the state is worshipped as a false god. And nobody has the slightest need to study or even to read the teachings of its early prophets. Their books are judged by hearsay. Their conclusions are accepted ready-made. Socialism is defended with a passionate lack of reason. It is never analysed. It's proof against all criticism. Socialism, especially Marxist socialism, uses the neat device of declaring all serious criticism outside the framework of possible discussion. This is the Overton window, I guess. And one is required to accept 95% of socialist doctrine as a basis for discussion. All that is left to argue about is the remaining 5%. So we can see this. I saw this at school. You know, they would talk about how important it was for people to discuss things and debate things, but within a very tightly controlled parameters of acceptability. Solzhenitsyn continues, contemporary society in Britain is living on self-deception and illusions, both in the world of politics and in the world of ideas. People build rickety structures to convince themselves that there is no danger. We, the oppressed people of Russia, the oppressed people of Eastern Europe, watch with anguish. We're watching the tragic enfeeblement of Europe. We offer you the experience of our suffering. We would like you to accept it without having to pay the monstrous price of death and slavery that we have paid. But your society refuses to heed our warning voices. I suppose we must admit, sad though it is, that experience cannot be transmitted. Everyone must experience everything for himself. And yeah, I think Solzhenitsyn's correct. This is where we are. I've been warning people who are taken in by the idea of some sort of technocracy, whether it's the tiny German moustache man's version of technocracy, some sort of ethno-nationalist police state, or kind of old school socialists. And then you point out to these people, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao, and these people will always come back at you with, oh, well, that wasn't real socialism. So what I'm saying to you here is that I really hope that this isn't necessary, but, you know, it may be that you have to experience these things for yourself in order for you to fully understand them. So that's all I want to say today. So God bless.